Lenora Bellwether yanked her tattered jacket, trying once more this day to shroud her slight build. Barely touching 4 feet 11 inches, sporting untamed auburn braids and spectacles so large they dominated her face, she'd come to grasp that anonymity offered best refuge at Blackwood Academy. The sprawling Gothic building, its labyrinthine passages and constant swarm of young people, had been her prison for the past 4 months, since relocating from Montana. She gripped the straps of her well-worn satchel tighter as she squeezed through the packed corridor, evading clusters of students who hardly registered her presence. The early morning light spilled through the arched windows, painting elongated forms upon the worn stone floors, where her boots whispered gently with each careful step. She always sought the same place, the art studio, where she might lose herself among the paint pots and canvases and pretend the outside world held no sway. The aroma of turpentine always calmed her. "Well, if it isn't the little sparrow," a voice sliced through the morning din like shattered glass. Lenora's heart plunged as she pinpointed the jeering tone of Jackson Blackwood, the self-declared overlord of Blackwood Academy. Towering at 6'3", with perfectly sculpted ebony hair and a self-assured air that came from constant obedience, Jackson commanded attention anywhere. His designer windbreaker strained across powerful shoulders, and his hazel eyes held a cruel spark that chilled Lenora's blood. Beside him were his ever-present lackeys. Finnegan Cole, a burly ginger with moles and a permanent sneer, and Reese Sterling, whose golden hair was always meticulously styled and whose laughter grated like stones grinding together. Together, they formed a menacing wall that barricaded Lenora's path to the studio. "Look, everybody, it's the tiny mouse," Jackson pressed on, his tone oozing fake concern. "Still trying to vanish inside that old coat?" Lenora's pulse raced in her ears as she tried to slip around them, but Finnegan moved to block her path. Students began to pause, detecting trouble, but not a single one dared get involved. This was Jackson's territory, and everyone understood to not stand up to him. She could hear the distant clang of the school bell, but it felt so far away. "I'm just heading to my painting class," Lenora whispered, her voice nearly drowned out by the surrounding noise. "What was that, Sparrow?" Jackson angled his ear dramatically. "I can't make out what you're saying over all that mumbling. Perhaps if you didn't dress like a vagrant, folk might actually pay attention to your words." Reese chuckled cruelly, and Finnegan cracked his knuckles. The sound made Lenora wince, an action that only seemed to embolden them more. What they weren't aware of, what nobody at Blackwood Academy knew, was that Lenora had been learning Wing Chun Kung Fu since the age of 7. Her mother, a former security guard, had insisted she learn to safeguard herself after a mugging near their old apartment. For years, she had practiced 4 times a week, learning how to use an attacker's own energy against them, to strike with speed and crushing force. Yet she couldn't employ those abilities. Not here, not against fellow students. Her mother had instilled in her that martial arts were for critical survival scenarios, not playground fights. Self-defense should always be a final option, she had cautioned her countless times. Evade if possible, battle only when you have to. The smell of rain wafted in from an open window, and she focused on that. And so she endured. Day after day, week after week, she swallowed her pride and her training, telling herself it would get better, that they would lose interest and move on to victimize someone else. She was incorrect. The incidents escalated gradually at first. Jackson would accidentally spill her art supplies in the hallway, sending brushes rolling across the floor while students stepped over them without even noticing. Finnegan would shove her hard enough to send her crashing into the trophy cases, the glass shaking ominously. Reese would make cutting remarks about her artwork whenever she passed, each syllable carefully picked to maximize embarrassment. The dining hall transformed into a hazard zone. Lenora learned to time her arrival carefully, waiting until Jackson and his group were already seated before making her move. She would grab a plate of pasta and find a secluded table in the corner, hoping to eat undisturbed. But peace was an extravagance she couldn't afford. "Hey, Sparrow!" Jackson's voice echoed across the dining hall during lunch on a particularly nasty Wednesday. "Why not come sit near us?" We promise not to bite. The entire dining hall swiveled to look as Lenora froze, her fork hovering over her pasta. Heat flushed her cheeks as scores of eyes fixated on her, anticipating the fallout. She could feel her palms clammy as she put down her plate. The clatter of silverware faded into background noise. "I'm fine here, thanks," she forced herself to say, her voice more confident than she felt. "Oh, but I insist." Jackson stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "Finnegan, Reese, why don't you go escort our friend over here?" The two boys rose like programmed attack dogs, their grins predatory. Lenora's muscles tightened, her body instinctively preparing to defend herself before she checked herself. She forced her shoulders to droop, her hands to unclench. She couldn't fight, not here, not now. As Finnegan and Reese closed in, she grabbed her satchel and hurried toward the exit, abandoning her uneaten lunch. The sound of their laughter trailed her out of the dining hall, reverberating in her mind long after she'd escaped to the haven of an empty music room. Mr. Abernathy, her choir teacher, peered up from his sheet music with a worried look. "Lenora, is everything all right, dear?" "I'm fine," Lenora lied, sinking into a seat by the grand piano. "Just wanted to practice my scales before practice." Mr. Abernathy studied her for a moment, his kind eyes seeing more than Lenora wanted to expose, but he simply nodded and went back to his work. It was the same response Lenora received from all the faculty. They witnessed what was taking place, but nobody wanted to get involved. It was simpler to avert their eyes, to pretend that teenage cruelty was simply a typical aspect of adolescence. The scent of old wood and dust filled the air. The gymnasium was another arena. During required physical training, Jackson would accidentally hurl volleyballs at her head during matches, the leather spheres connecting with sickening thuds that left her head swimming. Coach Henderson would blow his whistle and dismiss it as an accident, but the smirk on Jackson's face told a different story. "My bad, Sparrow," he would say with phony remorse. "Guess you need to sharpen those reflexes." If only he was aware of her reflexes. If only he realized that she could have caught that ball and hurled it back hard enough to knock him off his feet. But she gritted her teeth and rubbed her throbbing arm, reserving her fury for her training dummy at home. The changing rooms were the worst. Away from the vigilant eyes of supervisors, Jackson and his cohorts felt free to escalate their torment. They would conceal her clothes while she showered, forcing her to search frantically while wrapped in a towel. They would bang locker doors near her head, the metallic crashes making her flinch. Once, they stuffed her satchel with shaving foam, destroying her sketchbooks and homework. Throughout it all, Lenora remained silent. She cleaned up the messes, replaced her belongings, and tried to convince herself that ignoring them would make them lose interest. But bullies thrive on reactions, and her visible anguish only made them crave more. The breaking point occurred on a Thursday afternoon in early December. Lenora was headed to her locker after calculus class, her mind occupied with the upcoming winter break and the cherished 2-week respite from Jackson's abuse. She was thinking about the new Wing Chun drills her instructor had shown her the night before, complex sequences that required pinpoint accuracy and lightning-fast reflexes. She didn't see Jackson and his buddies lying in wait by her locker until it was too late. "There she is," Jackson declared loudly, attracting the attention of nearby students. "The invisible girl herself." Lenora approached warily, her key ready to quickly open her locker and snatch her things. But as she reached for the combination lock, Finnegan's hand shot out and seized her wrist. "Not so fast, Sparrow," he sneered. "We need a chat." "Release me," Lenora demanded, trying to wrench her arm free, but Finnegan's grip was like iron, his fingers digging into her flesh. "You know what I suspect." Jackson stepped closer, his towering form looming over her. "I bet you're hiding something. Nobody's this much of a freak for no reason." "Maybe she's got marks under that jacket," Reese suggested with a cruel laugh. "Maybe that's why she's always covered up." Jackson's eyes lit up with malicious interest. "Is that the truth, Sparrow? Are you concealing something beneath there?" Before Lenora could respond, Jackson's hand shot out and grabbed the front of her jacket. The fabric stretched and tore as he yanked at it, trying to rip it open. Lenora's hands flew to her shirt, trying to hold it closed, but Jackson was stronger and more determined. "Stop it!" she screamed, her voice cracking with fear and rage. "Leave me alone!" But Jackson didn't stop. If anything, her distress seemed to energize him. He pulled harder, the fabric straining against his grip. Students began to gather, forming a circle around the confrontation. Some pulled out their phones, ready to film whatever happened next. "Come on, Sparrow," Jackson taunted, his fingers twisted in her jacket. "What are you so scared of showing us?" That's when Lenora spotted her. Olivia Carmichael stood at the periphery of the crowd, her blue eyes wide with alarm. Olivia was everything Lenora wasn't: assured, well-liked, beautiful. Her blonde hair cascaded in perfect waves around her shoulders, and her grin could brighten any room. They had been lab partners in physics for the past month, and Olivia had always been kind to her, treating her like a human being instead of an annoyance to be disregarded. "Jackson, stop it!" Olivia said, pushing through the crowd. "Leave her alone." Jackson's grip on Lenora's jacket loosened slightly as he turned to face Olivia. "Well, well, if it isn't the goody two-shoes. This has nothing to do with you, Olivia." "It has everything to do with me when you're bullying someone who can't stand up for themselves," Olivia replied, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. Jackson's expression hardened. "You know what, Olivia? Maybe you need to learn the same lesson as your little friend here." He released Lenora's jacket and moved toward Olivia, his intentions obvious. The crowd held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Olivia stood her ground, but Lenora could see the fear in her eyes. The smell of cheap cologne hung heavy in the air. And that's when something inside Lenora snapped. Years of training, months of humiliation, and a lifetime of being told to walk away suddenly meant nothing. Jackson had crossed a line by threatening Olivia, and Lenora wasn't going to let him harm the only person who had shown her kindness. "Step away from her," Lenora said, her voice carrying a dangerous edge that made Jackson pause. He turned back to her with a laugh. "Oh, look." The Sparrow found her voice. "What are you going to do about it, freak?" Jackson lunged at Lenora, his hand reaching for her jacket again, but this time she was ready. Everything slowed down as her training took over. She could see the path of his movement, the openings in his defense, the perfect moment to strike. Her hand shot up and caught his wrist, her fingers finding the pressure point her instructor had taught her. Jackson's eyes widened in shock and pain as his grip went limp. Before he could respond, Lenora pivoted on her heel and used his own energy against him, sending him stumbling backward. "What the hell?" Jackson started to say, but Lenora wasn't finished. She stepped forward, her slight form suddenly radiating assurance and power. "I said step away from her." Finnegan and Reese moved to flank her, but Lenora was already calculating angles and distances. When Finnegan swung at her, she ducked under his arm and swept his legs, sending him crashing to the ground. Reese hesitated for a moment, obviously reconsidering his life choices, but Jackson's angry shout spurred him into action. Reese charged at her like a raging bull, all muscle and no technique. Lenora sidestepped at the last second and grabbed his outstretched arm, using his weight and energy to flip him over her shoulder. He hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of him. The crowd gasped, phones recording every moment. Jackson stared at his fallen friends in disbelief before turning back to Lenora with rage in his eyes. "You little freak," he snarled, pulling back his fist. "I'm going to destroy you." Jackson's punch came fast and hard, but Lenora had been expecting it. She leaned back, letting his fist whistle past her face, then grabbed his extended arm and twisted. Jackson cried out in agony as Lenora applied pressure to his elbow joint, forcing him to his knees. "You want to know what I'm hiding?" Lenora said, her voice calm and controlled despite the chaos around them. "I'm hiding the fact that I could have put an end to this months ago. I'm hiding the fact that I've been trained to harm people, and I chose not to use that training because I thought you might eventually mature." The air crackled with tension. She applied more pressure, and Jackson gasped in pain. "But you just made a mistake. You threatened someone I care about, and now I'm done being nice." Jackson tried to break free, but Lenora's grip was unyielding. She had him entirely at her mercy, and everyone in the hallway could see it. The great Jackson Blackwood, terror of Blackwood Academy, was on his knees and helpless. "Please," Jackson whimpered, his cocky facade crumbling. "Please, I'm sorry. I'll leave you alone." For a moment, Lenora felt the urge to hurt him, to make him atone for every humiliation, every moment of fear, every tear she had shed because of his cruelty. She could feel the power surging through her, the knowledge that she could break his arm with a simple twist of her wrist. But she didn't. Instead, she looked down at him with something that might have been pity. "I'm not going to become like you," she said quietly. "But if you ever touch me or Olivia again, if you ever harm someone who can't stand up for themselves, I won't be so lenient next time." She released him, and Jackson scrambled backward, clutching his arm. Finnegan and Reese were already pulling themselves to their feet, their faces flushed with shame and pain. "Are you all right?" Olivia appeared at Lenora's side, her eyes shining with admiration and concern. "I'm fine," Lenora said, suddenly aware of all the eyes on her. The hallway was silent, except for the sound of Jackson and his friends retreating, their reputations in tatters. "That was incredible," Olivia whispered. "Where did you learn to do that?" "My mom taught me," Lenora replied, her hands still trembling from the adrenaline. "She said I should only use it to safeguard myself or someone I care about." Olivia's smile was radiant. "Someone you care about?" Lenora felt her cheeks burn, but she nodded. "Yeah, someone I care about." The crowd began to disperse, students whispering excitedly about what they had witnessed. The story would spread through the school like wildfire, but for once, Lenora didn't mind being the center of attention. In the days that followed, Blackwood Academy felt like a different place. Jackson and his friends gave Lenora a wide berth, their eyes dropping to the floor whenever they passed her in the hallway. The casual cruelty that had once been their trademark was replaced by nervous glances and hushed conversations. Other students began to approach Lenora with newfound respect. Some wanted to know about her training, others simply wanted to be associated with the girl who had taken down Jackson Blackwood. She found herself invited to sit at different lunch tables, included in conversations she had never been part of before. But the most meaningful change was her relationship with Olivia. What had started as lab partner chemistry had blossomed into something deeper. They spent their lunch breaks together, talking about everything from their favorite bands to their ambitions for the future. Olivia had a way of making Lenora feel seen and valued, not just for her fighting skills, but for who she was as a person. "I always thought you were interesting," Olivia admitted one afternoon as they sat in the courtyard, sharing a bag of pretzels. "But I didn't know how to get close to you. You seemed so closed off." "I was protecting myself," Lenora said, watching a group of younger students kick a soccer ball on the grass. "I've been the new kid enough times to know that standing out usually means getting hurt." The leaves rustled in the wind. "But you stood out anyway," Olivia pointed out, "just not in the way you expected." Lenora smiled, thinking about how much her life had transformed in such a short time. My mom always said that sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even when you don't want to. A week after the incident, Lenora was surprised to find Jackson waiting by her locker after school. He looked smaller somehow, his shoulders slumped and his usual swagger replaced by anxious energy. "Can I talk to you?" he asked, his voice lacking its usual arrogance. Lenora studied him for a moment, her hand instinctively moving to her satchel strap. "What do you want, Jackson?" "I wanted to apologize," he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "What I did to you, what we did, it was wrong. I understand that now." "You understand that now?" Lenora repeated, her voice skeptical. "You didn't understand it was wrong when you were doing it?" Jackson's face flushed. I don't know what I thought. I guess I enjoyed feeling powerful, and you were an easy target. But seeing you fight back, seeing how strong you really are, it made me realize how pathetic I was being." "Apologizing doesn't undo months of torment," Lenora said firmly. "It doesn't erase the fear or the embarrassment." "I know," Jackson nodded. "I can't undo what I did, but I can promise it won't happen again, to you or anyone else." Lenora considered his words, seeing something in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. Genuine regret. "Actions speak louder than words, Jackson. If you truly want to make amends, prove it by being better." "I will," he said sincerely. "I promise." As Jackson walked away, Lenora felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The confrontation had transformed more than just her status at school. It had transformed her perception of herself. She had learned that strength wasn't just about physical ability or fighting skills. It was about knowing when to fight and when to show mercy, when to stand up and when to step back. Olivia appeared at her side, having watched the exchange from a distance. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Free," Lenora replied, surprising herself with the honesty of the answer. "For the first time in months, I feel free." They walked out of the school together, the afternoon sun painting elongated forms across the parking lot. Lenora no longer felt the need to hide in baggy coats or evade eye contact with her classmates. She had found her voice, her strength, and something even more valuable, she had found someone who saw her for who she truly was. The girl who had once been invisible was now impossible to ignore, not because she sought attention, but because she had learned to stand tall and face the world with confidence. Blackwood Academy would never be the same, and neither would she. As they reached the street, Olivia slipped her hand into Lenora's, their fingers entwining naturally. "Want to grab some hot chocolate? I know this great cafe downtown." Lenora smiled, feeling the warmth of Olivia's touch and the promise of whatever lay ahead. "I'd like that." The story of the quiet girl who fought back would become legend at Blackwood Academy, passed down through generations of students who heard whispers in the hallways about the day everything changed. But for Lenora, it wasn't about becoming a legend. It was about finding the courage to be herself, to protect what mattered, and to never let anyone make her feel small again. The scent of pine needles filled the air. She had learned that sometimes the greatest victories come not from destroying your enemies, but from choosing mercy when you have the power to do harm. In sparing Jackson when she could have hurt him, she had proven that strength and compassion could coexist, that standing up for yourself didn't require losing your humanity. The bullies had grabbed her jacket and shouted, expecting her to cower as she always had. Instead, she had pushed back against their cruelty and discovered something infinitely more valuable than vengeance. She had discovered herself. 21,382